November 9th, 1995, a 21-year-old woman stands alone at a phone box in the dead of night. Her voice calm, but beneath it, fear. She's miles from home. A stranger watches. Moments later, she vanishes, gone without a trace. Her name was JoJo Dullard, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, trying to make it home after a night out. She hitched a lift, just like thousands of others did back then, but this time, she never made it. Nearly 3 decades later, JoJo's family is still searching for answers. Who picked her up? What happened in those final moments? And why, after all these years, has no one come forward? In this episode, we retrace her final steps, uncover new leads, and ask the question, who killed JoJo Dullard? Welcome to Crimes That Haunt Us, the channel where we dive deep into the most chilling and mysterious cold cases. If this interests you, hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments to help us grow. On a warm July afternoon, a teenage girl walks home, greeting her neighbors, unaware she'll never be seen alive again. Within hours, she's reported missing. By morning, her case dominates headlines, linked to a disturbing pattern of vanished women, some never found, others discovered months later in remote locations. Fear spreads across Ireland. The Vanishing Triangle is born. And so too is a dedicated task force, Operation Trace, tracing, reviewing, and collating evidence. The team was initially assigned to investigate the disappearances of 6 young women. Annie McCarrick, an American student who vanished in March 1993. JoJo Dullard, last seen hitchhiking in November 1995. Fiona Pender, a heavily pregnant woman who disappeared in August 1996. Kira Breen, a teenager who left home one night in February 1997 and never returned. Fiona Sinnott, a young mother who vanished in February 1998. And Deirdre Jacob, last seen near her home in July 1998. But as the investigation deepened, more cases emerged. Women who had been abducted and murdered, their bodies later discovered in remote locations. These are their stories. This series is based on retired Irish detective Alan Bailey's book, Missing, Presumed, featuring first-hand Gardai accounts and comprehensive evidence, bringing you the most in-depth look at Ireland's most chilling unsolved cases. Just like Annie McCarrick, Josephine, JoJo Dullard, worked as a waitress. But while Annie had fallen in love with Ireland after moving from America, JoJo had fallen for an American named Mike, a young traveler she met while working in Dublin. Mike was on a gap year, passing through Ireland on his way around the world. For a few months, the two were inseparable. Then, just as quickly, it was over. Mike moved on, leaving JoJo heartbroken. That heartbreak was one of the key reasons JoJo decided to leave Dublin in late 1995. She moved back to her hometown of Callan, County Kilkenny, sharing a place with her close friend and flatmate Mary Cullinan. It was meant to be a fresh start, a way to move on. For 2 years, JoJo and Mary had made a life in Dublin. They had first come to the city to take a beautician's course, but the fees had proven too expensive. Instead, they bounced between flats in Rathmines and Phibsborough, picking up waitressing jobs in different pubs to get by. Eventually, they both found work at Dawson's pub in Callan. The opportunity to return home, to be closer to family, felt like the right move. JoJo embraced life back in Callan. She found her own small flat in the town centre and settled in quickly. Being home meant everything to her, especially after the loss she had already endured. Her life had been marked by tragedy from the very start. JoJo never knew her father. He died suddenly just weeks before she was born, leaving behind his pregnant wife and their 4 young children. That loss bonded the family tightly, but when JoJo was just 10 years old, another devastating blow shattered their world. Her mother passed away. Her older sisters Kathleen and Mary stepped up, doing everything they could to fill the void their mother left behind. JoJo spent years moving between their homes, first living with Kathleen and her husband Seamus, and later moving to Dublin to stay with Mary and her husband Martin. When she decided to return to Callan, the family was relieved. She was back where she belonged. Thursday, November 9th, 1995 started like any other. Early that morning, JoJo boarded a bus bound for Dublin. Even after moving back to Callan, she still had loose ends in the city. She and Mary had been collecting their social welfare payments at the Harold's Cross post office, and that Thursday was the final day she needed to pick up her money. With cash in hand and hours to kill before her return bus at 6 p.m. from Bus Iris, Jojo decided to catch up with old friends. Back when she lived in Dublin, Jojo and Mary had spent countless nights in Brussels, a pub in the city's south inner area. That Thursday afternoon, she wandered back in, hoping to find a familiar face. And she did. Behind the bar was Anthony, an old friend from her Dublin days. They fell into easy conversation, reminiscing, laughing, swapping stories. As the afternoon stretched on, other friends came and went, dropping in and out of the conversation. It was a carefree, ordinary reunion. Sometime around 2:30 p.m., an old flame walked into the bar, Roman. Jojo had been involved with him months earlier in a brief but intense affair. Though their relationship had ended, the connection between them hadn't fully faded. As the afternoon drifted into evening, old feelings stirred once again. The two sat close, reminiscing over drinks, their chemistry reigniting. It wasn't long before they made a decision. Tonight, they would be together. A quick phone call was made to the North Star Hotel on Amiens Street. A room was booked under their names, but fate had other plans. Another familiar face appeared at the bar, Angela, Roman's girlfriend. She had been living with him for months, unaware or perhaps just unwilling to believe that there was still unfinished business between him and Jojo. The sight of them together sent her into a rage. Voices were raised, accusations flew, the confrontation escalated until finally Roman made his choice. He left with Angela. And just like that, Jojo's plans for the night unraveled. By now, she had been drinking for hours. She had missed her bus home and she was stranded in Dublin. Had she been a little more sober or a little less angry at the way Roman had strung her along, she might have paused. She might have booked herself into one of the cheap city centre hostels and waited until morning to go home. It was a simple choice, an ordinary choice, a choice that, like so many others before her, would have life-altering consequences. Impulsively, she decided to take her chances at Bus Iris, hoping to find a late bus heading south towards Waterford or Wexford, anything that could bring her closer to Callan. When she arrived just after 9 p.m, the station was nearly deserted. The last bus of the night was preparing to leave, but it was only going as far as Naas. With few other options, Jojo boarded. Hitchhiking was still common in 1995. The bus pulled into its final stop, just across from Naas Gardai station at around 10 p.m. The long, exhausting day had caught up with Jojo. She had fallen asleep on the journey. The driver had to wake her up and let her know this was the end of the line. Now she had a choice to make. She could have walked into the Gardai station and asked to wait inside until morning. It was common enough back then. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped out into the cold night air and started walking towards the main road, heading in the direction of Kilcullen. She had been standing on the roadside for only a few moments when a car pulled over. The driver was a man. He wasn't going far, just to Kilcullen, only 12 kilometers down the road. But she accepted the ride anyway, knowing that she still had a long way to go. As they drove the dark countryside, she told him how much further she had to travel. His response was almost chilling in hindsight. He turned to her and said, "Be careful who you accept a lift from." It would be the last known in-person conversation JoJo Dullard would ever have. He even suggested she find lodgings for the night and wait until morning to continue her journey. But Jojo had already come this far. She was determined to press on. At Kilcullen, her luck seemed to hold out once again. She had barely stuck out her thumb before another car pulled up beside her. This time, the driver was younger than the last. He was friendly, but his journey was short. He was only heading as far as Moone, a small village along the old Dublin-Waterford main road. In 1995, the N10 motorway bypasses hadn't been built yet, meaning every car traveling south still had to pass through these rural towns. Moone wasn't ideal. It would still leave her with more than half the journey ahead of her, but standing alone on a dark road in the middle of the night, any distance covered was better than none, so she got in. They arrived in Moone just after 11:30 p.m. The driver pulled over in the village's main street, dropping Jojo off beside a telephone kiosk. From here, the next step on her journey would be Castle Dermot, a slightly larger town that would still leave her with 50 more kilometers to travel. She was deep into the night now, alone, in a tiny village, and nowhere near home. As she stood there in the darkness, the weight of her situation must have finally begun to set in. The long, exhausting day, the countless lifts still needed, the sheer, impossible distance she had left to cover. The only glow of light on the deserted street came from the phone booth, a small beacon of safety in the cold emptiness of the village. Jojo made her way inside, picked up the receiver and dialed. She called Mary Cullinan. If Mary had been waiting for her to arrive home on their last bus, she needed to know that Jojo wasn't on it. And as the call continued, another thought must have crossed Jojo's mind. Her brother lived not too far away, just past Afai. If things got desperate, maybe she could call him, maybe he could come and get her. Jojo kept the door of the kiosk slightly ajar, trying to flag down passing cars as she talked. Several motorists saw her that night. Years later, when detectives from Operation Trace revisited the case, they would hear from witnesses who had driven past and spotted her standing in the phone booth, door half open, thumb outstretched. They all said the same thing. They regretted not stopping. If they had, they might have saved her life. On the other end of the line, Mary listened as Jojo caught her up on the day's events. Gossip about their old friends, the unexpected run-in with Roman. Then suddenly, Jojo stopped talking. "Hold on a second," she said. Mary heard the sound of the phone being placed down. Then, the kiosk door creaking shut. Silence. For 30 long seconds, nothing. Then Jojo's voice came back, breathless, rushed. "I have a lift. I'm off." The line went dead. That phone call, those final breathless words, would be the last time anyone heard from JoJo Dullard. Over the years, investigators have agonized over what might have been if Jojo had shared just one small detail with Mary that night. The color of the car, the number of passengers, even the general make or model. Any clue at all might have been enough to change the course of the investigation that followed. But if Jojo's fate was sealed the moment she stepped into that car, then those responsible had also taken a gamble. They couldn't have known whether she had mentioned something, anything, to the person she had been speaking to. One witness did come forward. She told Gardai that as she was driving past the phone booth in Moone, she saw a young woman running from the kiosk toward a car that had pulled up a short distance away. She watched as the girl opened the door and got in. She couldn't be certain, but she believed the car was a four-door, dark in color, possibly a Toyota Carina, a common model in the 1990s. But there was one detail in her account that stood out. She said she was fairly sure Jojo had opened the rear passenger door. That suggested at least two people were already inside, a driver and a front seat passenger. Jojo wasn't just getting into a car, she was stepping into a situation where she was outnumbered. For years, reports have focused on Moone as the last place Jojo was seen, but was it? Several people later told Gardai that they saw an unfamiliar woman walking along the main street in Castle Dermot, the next town over from Moone, just before midnight that Thursday night. The timelines matched. If Jojo had been picked up in Moone, it would have taken about that long to reach Castle Dermot. The sightings came from people leaving pubs and restaurants, as well as staff working late-night shifts in local shops. One man even claimed to have crossed paths with her as he walked into a chipper. He described her as walking along the main street past a local school heading towards the main road leading to Carlow, the exact route she would have followed on the way home to Kilkenny. By the following evening, Friday, November 10, Jojo's absence was impossible to ignore. Mary Cullinan arrived at Dawson's pub for her shift and immediately felt uneasy. Jojo hadn't been in touch all day. Not a call, not a message, nothing. When Mary mentioned the late-night phone call to her boss, they decided to ring Jojo's sister, Kathleen, to see if she had heard anything. She hadn't. And the moment Kathleen learned that her younger sister had been hitchhiking alone, late at night, dread set in. She started making calls. Friends, family, anyone who might have seen or heard from Jojo. No one had. That's when Kathleen picked up the phone again, this time to the Gardai. Jojo was missing. It was the first of many calls Kathleen would make to the station, each one more desperate than the last. But something about their response didn't sit right. It felt dismissive, blasé, like they weren't taking it seriously. Days later, Kathleen would walk into the station in person. She needed them to understand something was terribly wrong. It would take 4 days for the investigation into JoJo Dullard's disappearance to truly begin, and by then, it was already too late. The first missing person report had been made on Friday, November 10th, less than 24 hours after Jojo's last known contact. But it wasn't until Monday, November 13th, that Gardai finally launched a serious inquiry. 4 critical days had passed, 4 days where potential evidence could have been lost. Standing on a rural roadside in the dead of night, hitchhiking to a destination she would never reach, alarm bells should have been ringing immediately, but they weren't. By the time the Gardai focused their attention on Moone, the trail had already begun to grow cold. Once it was confirmed that Jojo's last phone call had come from a kiosk in Moone, search teams concentrated their efforts on the roadway leading from there towards Castle Dermot. The call was verified through phone records. After Jojo hung up, the next outgoing call from that telephone booth wouldn't be made for several hours. The silence that followed was haunting. Over the next few days, search efforts intensified. Gardai, the army, the civil defense teams and hundreds of volunteers combed the roadsides hoping to find any trace of Jojo. Media appeals went out. The public was urged to come forward with information. And it worked. Drivers who had picked Jojo up that night came forward. 2 men, one who drove her from Naas to Kilcullen and another who took her from Kilcullen to Moone, both contacted Gardai after seeing the appeals. Their accounts were crucial in piecing together her movements that night. But soon, their identities became public knowledge, and the focus of the case began to shift. One of the men who had given Jojo a lift belonged to a prominent local family. Whispers began circulating, speculation turned to suspicion, and in no time at all, the rumor mill exploded. Some media outlets all but named him as a prime suspect, fueling a frenzy that soon spiraled out of control. Then came the most chilling rumor of all. Jojo's body, some claimed, was buried on a land belonging to his family. By the time Operation Trace reopened this case years later, speculation had taken on a life of its own. Detectives arriving in Moone were met with a wall of accusations. The dogs in the street know who killed Jojo, they were told. Rumors ran rampant that the Gardai weren't just failing to find the suspect, they were covering for him. And if the gossip was to be believed, everyone already knew where Jojo's body was buried. But if that was true, why had nothing been done? 2 dominant theories emerged. Some claimed Jojo's remains had been concealed in freshly poured concrete for a cattle shed foundation on the suspect father's farm. Others insisted she had been dumped in drainage ditches that were being cleared around that time. Neither theory was proven, but detectives knew one thing for certain. They would never make progress in their investigation until they put these rumors to rest. If JoJo Dullard had been buried under a newly constructed cattle shed, they needed proof. If she had been dumped in drainage ditches that were being filled around the time of her disappearance, they needed evidence. But what they found destroyed both theories instantly. The builder who had erected the byre confirmed that the structure had been standing long before Jojo vanished. Records from the company that supplied the concrete backed this up. The foundation had been poured well in advance of November 95. As for the ditches, the contractor who had dug and maintained them told detectives that his work had been finished at least a year before Jojo's disappearance. The information had always been there, clear, basic, and easy to verify. And yet, it had taken years for anyone to use it to dispel the cloud of suspicion and fear that had hung over the community. But even with those rumors debunked, one glaring mystery remained. If Jojo had made it to Castle Dermot that night, who picked her up next? Several people had reported seeing a woman, possibly Jojo, walking along Castle Dermot's main street just before midnight. But no driver ever came forward to say they had picked up a female hitchhiker there. No one admitted to giving her a lift from Moone. No one admitted to stopping for her in Castle Dermot. That silence cast serious doubt over the reported sightings. When Operation Trace took over the case, detectives refused to dismiss the Castle Dermot sightings outright. They believed the original investigation had made a mistake by overlooking these accounts. If the reports of Jojo being seen in Castle Dermot were true, then the entire narrative of her disappearance shifted. It meant that the assumptions about certain individuals in Moone being responsible had to be reconsidered. Operation Trace operated under one principle. Every piece of evidence, even contradictory evidence, had to be investigated until proven otherwise. As the days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months, the search for Jojo continued. Investigators pursued every single lead, every reported sighting, every whispered rumor, every possible scrap of information. In an unprecedented move, Gardai conducted a massive search of every ditch, roadside, opening, and byroad between Moone and Castle Dermot, and then extended the search all the way to Carlow Town. They were desperate to find anything. A piece of clothing, a discarded possession, a single clue that could tell them what had happened to Jojo, but they found nothing. No evidence, no trace of her belongings, no sign of Jojo at all. From the very beginning, Gardai knew they couldn't solve Jojo Dullard's disappearance without the public's help. A massive campaign was launched to keep Jojo's case in the public eye. One of the most high-profile efforts was a full-scale reconstruction of her final known movements, staged right in the heart of Moone Village. Then came the most chilling scene. She stood on the roadside, her thumb outstretched, as the lights of an approaching car cut through the darkness. That same evening, Friday, November 10, an incident in Kilkenny would briefly sidetrack the investigation. Two Englishmen, John Smith and Trevor Williams, were arrested while attempting to break into a payphone inside a pub. The pair were small-time criminals, petty thieves who specialized in stealing from public phone boxes. A single phone box could hold a significant amount of cash, but that night, their luck ran out. The pub they had chosen to rob just happened to be a favorite spot for off-duty Gardai. Two officers, enjoying a quiet drink after work, immediately noticed something wasn't right. The men were arrested. But Smith and Williams were no ordinary criminals. They were nomads. They lived on the road, rarely staying in the same place for long. That night, they had been driving a dark, four-door Ford Sierra with English plates. Because of the nature of their crimes, they had to constantly travel across the country, never staying too long in one location. When they were taken in, Gardai didn't immediately charge them. The theft could only be proven once an engineer from the post office determined exactly how much money had been stolen. With no immediate charges against them, they were released. They didn't wait around. Within hours, they had left Kilkenny, driven to Rosslare, and caught a ferry back to England. Over the next few months, they would return to Ireland periodically, constantly changing their routes and ferry ports to avoid detection. Because of their Kilkenny connection and the fact that they targeted phone booths, details of their arrest were flagged to the JoJo Dullard investigation team. It was routine. Every crime in Kilkenny and Kildare during the time frame was logged and cross-checked for any possible connection, but there was no evidence linking them to Jojo's disappearance. The report was filed away. Less than a month after Jojo Dullard vanished, another woman disappeared. On the night of 21st of December 95, Marilyn Rynn was walking home after a work night out in Blanchardstown, Dublin. She never made it. Her naked body was found 2 weeks later. She had been and strangled. The man responsible was her neighbor, David Lawler. Lawler was quickly arrested, convicted, and sentenced for Marilyn's murder. But when detectives began digging into his background, they discovered something unsettling: a connection to Jojo Dullard. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put him on their radar. Lawler was from Baltinglass, a short distance from where Jojo was last seen alive. Even more disturbingly, he had been a regular customer at Brussels, the same Dublin pub where Jojo spent the afternoon of her disappearance. In Brussels, Lawler was known by a nickname, Jesus, because of his long beard and wild, unkempt hair. He would sit for hours watching female customers. His behavior was eerily similar to his cousin, one of Ireland's most infamous criminals, the convicted rapist and suspected killer Larry Murphy. For a while, Lawler was a serious person of interest in Jojo's case, but eventually he was ruled out. Records showed he had used his bank card at the ATM in Blanchardstown around midnight on November 9th, the night Jojo vanished. Further analysis showed activity on his home computer at the same time. It was impossible for him to have been involved. Lawler would surface again in the trace investigation, but by then the focus had shifted, because a new lead had emerged, and this time it moved the search 80 kilometers south to Kilmacow, County Kilkenny. In January 1997, more than a year after Jojo's disappearance, a Waterford taxi driver named Noel Dalton came forward with disturbing information. It was Friday, November 10, 1995, the night after Jojo vanished. Dalton had just finished his shift and was driving home to Kilmacow, a small village on the Dublin side of Waterford. As he neared his turnoff on the main road, he noticed something strange. A car was pulled over onto the hard shoulder. A man was standing near the driver's side, urinating onto the road. Then, something shocking happened. As Dalton slowed down to take his turn, the rear passenger door of the parked car suddenly swung open. A woman jumped out, barefoot, thin. She ran as if for her life. Within seconds, another man jumped out after her. He grabbed her around the waist, holding her tight. The man who had been urinating turned, saw what was happening, and rushed over to help. Together, they forced the struggling woman back into the car. The first man jumped into the driver's seat. The car sped away towards Waterford City. Dalton could only watch. It had all happened so fast, but he was certain of a few things. The car had English plates. It was red, and it looked like a Ford Sierra saloon. It was a chilling detail, because another witness, back in Moone, had described seeing Jojo get into a dark-colored four-door car. And the timing? If the woman Dalton saw was Jojo Dullard, then the time it took to travel from Moone to Kilmacow was exactly right. Had Jojo been alive, fighting for her freedom just hours after that last phone call to Mary Cullinan? Had she managed to escape only to be dragged back into the nightmare? The realization was sickening, and the worst part, by the time Dalton came forward, it was too late. Whatever forensic evidence may have been left at the scene was long gone. With Dalton's sighting, a new theory emerged. What if Jojo had been taken by two traveling criminals? A pair of Englishmen with a dark Ford Sierra and no fixed address. The focus immediately turned back to the two known offenders, John Smith and Trevor Williams. The same men who had been caught robbing a phone box in a Kilkenny pub on November 10th, 1995. The same men who had been driving a dark Ford Sierra with English plates. The same night Jojo disappeared, their whereabouts were unknown. Had they been on the road between Dublin and Kilkenny that night? Had they picked up Jojo? Detectives launched a full-scale search to track them down. A total media blackout was put in place. If Smith and Williams found out they were being hunted, they would vanish underground, just like they had done before, and Gardai weren't willing to take that risk. The hunt was on. The search for Smith and Williams dragged on for months. Then, a break. In May 1997, Gardai found them sleeping rough in their car. They were hiding in a wooded area outside Golden, a small village in South Tipperary. Their Ford Sierra had been flagged in the Garda system. When officers ran the plates, the vehicle immediately linked back to Jojo's case. The men were arrested and taken to Cashel Garda station, but when interrogated separately, Smith and Williams did something unexpected. They gave an alibi, and it checked out. On the night Jojo disappeared, they had been in Cork City. They had stayed at a bed and breakfast in Blackpool. The lady, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Devlin, remembered them well. She confirmed that at 12:30 a.m. they had made a reverse charge phone call to check on William's sick mother in London. She even had their car registration in her guest book. Smith and Williams had nothing to do with Jojo's disappearance. But the search wasn't over, because two Gardai from Baltinglass, who had been working Jojo's case from the very beginning, weren't ready to give up. And soon they would uncover another lead, a new informant, a new suspect, a new horror. By mid-1998, more than 2.5 years after JoJo Dullard vanished, detectives Dan Stapleton and Jim Fitzmaurice received a phone call. It came from a Dublin solicitor. One of his clients, a prisoner serving time, had come forward with new information about Jojo's disappearance, and it implicated a well-known Irish sex offender. The tip was immediately passed on to Operation Trace. Detectives met with the informant, and the story he told was horrifying. According to the informant, on the night of November 9th, 1995, two cars left Clondalkin, Dublin around 10 p.m, travelling in convoy toward Waterford. There were 6 people in total, 2 men in the lead car, 4 people, 2 men and 2 women in the second car. All of them were known to Gardai. And the front seat passenger of the lead car, Michael Henry, a violent sexual predator who had just been released from prison after serving time for a brutal sexual assault. As the cars drove through Moone, they slowed down, not wanting to attract the attention of local Gardai. That's when Henry spotted her, JoJo Dullard, standing outside the phone booth, the door slightly open, her arm outstretched, trying to hitch a lift. Henry saw an opportunity. He told his driver to pull over. When Jojo approached, he told her exactly what she wanted to hear. They were going to Waterford. She didn't hesitate. She ran back to the phone booth to finish her call to Mary Cullinan. As she hung up, she made her final, fateful choice. She got into the back seat of the car, and the convoy continued south. As they drove, Henry turned to his driver and smirked. "We'll have some fun with her," he said. According to the informant, everyone in the second car knew what he meant. Henry was a dangerous man, and no one dared to stop him. They kept driving. When the convoy reached Kilkenny, the 2 cars split up. The second car drove away. They left Jojo behind, alone, with 2 men. If this account was true, Jojo was alive for hours after that phone call in Moone, and it lined up almost perfectly with the Dalton sighting. A woman jumping out of a red Ford Sierra, barefoot, terrified, before being dragged back inside by 2 men near Kilmacow, just outside Waterford. Later that night, residents of a quiet cul-de-sac outside Waterford city were woken by a sound that sent shivers down their spines. A woman screaming. Multiple people went outside to investigate, and what they saw haunted them for years. A naked woman was running down the footpath screaming in terror. Then, Michael Henry burst out of his house. He grabbed her, he dragged her back inside, and then silence. Nobody intervened, nobody called the Gardai, and nobody ever saw that woman again. Months later, after relentless detective work, Stapleton and Fitzmaurice managed to turn the informant. He now claimed he had done more than just hear about Jojo's fate. He had helped dispose of her body. On Friday morning, November 10, 1995, at 9 a.m., he said he helped Henry and another man remove a female body wrapped in a bedsheet from Henry's house. They loaded it into a van, and they drove to a remote wooded area in County Kerry. There, they buried her. The informant agreed to show Gardai the exact location. But there was one problem. He was still in prison, and had a history of absconding when given compassionate leave. It took high-level approval from the Department of Justice to arrange his temporary release. Finally, he was collected from prison and driven to a remote forest near Castle Island, Kerry. This, he claimed, was Jojo's final resting place. A specialist team was assembled, members of Operation Trace, ballistics experts, a cadaver search dog from the Gardai Canine Unit. They searched for 3 days. It rained non-stop, and they found nothing. Not a single piece of evidence suggested that Jojo's body had ever been there. The operation wound down in failure, but the informant didn't back down. He insisted Gardai hadn't searched properly. A larger search team was assembled. Plans were made for a second forensic dig. Then, a shocking discovery derailed everything. Before finalizing the new search, detectives examined the informant's prison records. What they found blew his story apart. On the morning of November 10, 1995, the exact time he claimed to be burying Jojo's body, he was nowhere near Kerry. He was in Carlow Court, in police custody. The entire story about disposing of Jojo's remains? A lie. When confronted, the informant changed his story instantly. Now he claimed that he had only heard the account from another prisoner. He had made himself part of the story in order to secure a temporary release from prison. With that one lie, every credible detail he had given collapsed. Even if parts of his original account were true, his credibility was ruined. No charges could be filed, and Michael Henry walked free. Months later, a second woman came forward with a terrifyingly similar story. She had been hitchhiking from Dublin to Carlow around the same time Jojo vanished. She had accepted a lift from 2 men in a large car. Another car pulled up behind them and followed them. Both cars stopped in a deserted fast food parking lot. The front seat passenger climbed into the back and sexually assaulted her. She fought back. She managed to open the rear door and jump out. Both cars sped away. She was left alone in the dark. The similarities to the informant's account of Jojo's abduction were chilling. Had he taken a real crime and twisted it into his own fabricated confession? No one has ever been charged in relation to this second woman's attack. For 29 years, the disappearance of Josephine JoJo Dullard remained one of Ireland's most haunting mysteries. Then, on November 12, 2024, the case exploded back into the headlines. A man in his 50s was arrested on suspicion of murder. For the first time since 1995, someone was being formally detained in connection with Jojo's disappearance. But just as quickly as it happened, he was released without charge. The man was from a well-known family in the Kildare Wicklow region. His name was never publicly disclosed, but detectives had been watching him for years. They believed he had been in Moone on the night Jojo vanished, the very night she had made her final phone call from the public call box. He had been questioned before, witness statements had been taken, but he had never been arrested until now. His detention wasn't random. It was a calculated move. Gardai arrested him on a Monday morning just 2 days after they had launched a high-profile public appeal on the 29th anniversary of Jojo's disappearance. The timing was deliberate. Detectives hoped that the renewed media attention and the weight of nearly 3 decades of suspicion would put him under pressure. They had new evidence, new witness statements, new questions that needed answers, and most disturbingly, it was revealed that, in the days following Jojo's disappearance, the suspect had a minor injury to his face. This implication was chilling. Had Jojo fought back? Had she left her mark on the man who took her? As the suspect sat in a Gardai interview room, detectives moved in on 2 private homes. Meanwhile, land at Ballyhook, Grange Con, County Wicklow was cordoned off. Search teams combed through the vast rural terrain looking for anything, a piece of clothing, a buried item, a hidden clue that could finally tell them where Jojo was taken that night. Did they find anything? Gardai have never said. But whatever it was, or wasn't, discovered, it wasn't enough. Because after 24 hours in custody, the only suspect ever arrested in the case was released without charge. For years, Jojo's family had pleaded for answers, for action, for justice. Instead, they had been shut out. They weren't partners in the investigation. They were outsiders, tolerated but never truly involved. To this day, JoJo Dullard has never been found. Her family has never had a body to bury. No remains, no grave, only a name. Another woman who vanished into the Irish night. And a case that, despite almost 30 years of searching, remains as open and as cold as ever. Thank you for staying and watching JoJo Dullard's story. Please feel free to share your own thoughts and theories and let us know down in the comments below. And we'll see you next time.